Rodney Alcala was a man whose outward charm masked a sinister darkness. Born in 1943 in New York, he was intelligent, attractive, and socially adept, traits that would later allow him to manipulate those around him. Early in life, he showed a fascination with power and control, a desire to dominate that he kept hidden behind a veneer of normalcy. He pursued photography and creative interests, cultivating an image of a sensitive artist, someone who could be trusted, admired even. It was a mask that would help him lure victim after victim into a carefully constructed trap. Those who encountered Alcala often described him as polite, engaging, almost disarmingly charming. He had the ability to study people, understand their vulnerabilities and exploit them without hesitation, all while presenting himself as harmless or even helpful. His first known victim, Cornelia Crilly, was a young girl whose life had only just begun. Cornelia was bright, energetic, and full of youthful curiosity. Alcala approached her like any mentor might, a friendly presence who offered attention and validation. To a teenager eager for approval, he seemed kind and trustworthy. Once he gained her confidence, he isolated her. The act itself was swift, methodical, and cold. Cornelia would never return home, leaving behind only grief-stricken parents and a community asking how such evil could strike so silently. After Cornelia, Alcala did not stop. His next victim, Ellen Hover, was only slightly older but just as vulnerable. Ellen loved art and photography, the very things Alcala used to create a bridge of trust. He approached her with charm and interest, praising her talents and suggesting opportunities for creative collaboration. Once Ellen felt safe in his presence, he acted. The details of what happened to her were gruesome, and the pattern was clear. He manipulated curiosity and ambition to draw victims in, then exerted control until he could strike with deadly precision. As investigators would later discover, Alcala's methods were sophisticated. He would choose locations where he could control the environment, ensuring there were no witnesses, and often used deception to avoid detection. After each murder, he seemed to vanish into ordinary life, appearing in public, attending social events, even pursuing normal employment. His ability to compartmentalize was frightening. He could return to a cafe, a photography class, or a television studio, all while the trail of his crimes extended across the city. Charlotte Lamb, only 12, was another victim whose life was stolen by Alcala's calculated cruelty. Bright, full of artistic promise, she trusted him because he offered attention to her creativity. Charlotte's curiosity was her undoing. Alcala had a knack for convincing young girls that he appreciated their talents and had their best interests in mind. Once he had them alone, the charming facade dissolved, replaced by the lethal predator beneath. Charlotte's disappearance caused terror among parents and children alike, raising questions about how someone so seemingly normal could commit such acts. Following Charlotte, Alcala moved through Los Angeles like a shadow, his intelligence and adaptability making him difficult to track. Jill Barker, 18, had recently graduated from high school and was looking forward to college and a life full of possibilities. Alcala approached her with compliments, interest in her artistic ambitions, and offers of guidance. He studied her responses, adjusted his approach, and eventually isolated her in a situation where she had no chance to escape. Jill's story repeated the pattern established by earlier victims, and yet each life lost added urgency to law enforcement efforts. Georgia Wickstead, only 15, was a girl who loved swimming and music. Alcala targeted her using the same methods: charm, attention, and an appeal to trust. He carefully monitored how she reacted to him, using psychological manipulation to gain compliance. He created a sense of safety while simultaneously planning her demise. Each victim taught him more about human behavior, allowing him to refine his methods and move to the next target with frightening efficiency. Robin Samso, 19, had just begun to explore adulthood. Alcala's approach mirrored what he had used with others: interest in her life, validation of her talents, and the pretense of mentorship. Robin's trust was her vulnerability. Once isolated, she became part of the horrifying pattern Alcala repeated for years. The seemingly ordinary man who could smile on a television show or walk down the street unnoticed had a dark side that left families devastated and communities fearful. Survivors' accounts later revealed his disturbing psychological tactics. He studied his victims, learned their habits, their hopes and their weaknesses. He could appear warm and trustworthy, then switch to subtle intimidation, keeping them off balance. He exploited empathy, curiosity, and a natural desire to trust, creating moments where victims felt safe even as danger closed in. His manipulation was almost artistic in its precision, a cruel twist on his love of photography, control, and observation. Law enforcement faced immense challenges tracking Alcala. He crossed city boundaries, moved between neighborhoods, and left minimal forensic evidence in the early years. Witness statements were often fragmented, and technology at the time limited rapid identification. Still, patterns emerged. The sequence of disappearances, similarities in approach, and eventual discovery of photographic evidence began to reveal the scale of his crimes. Alcala's charm and intellect had allowed him to evade capture, but investigators slowly began connecting dots. Among the most disturbing discoveries was Alcala's use of photography as a tool of control. Images of women and girls, taken under pretense or coercion, became evidence of manipulation and predation. Photographs that had seemed innocent or artistic were in fact trophies and documentation of his crimes. This chilling aspect of his behavior highlighted a calculated cruelty, blending his apparent passion for art with his obsession with control. Investigators pieced together timelines, verified sightings, and slowly reconstructed the path from one victim to the next, building a case that would ultimately span decades. Alcala's pattern was relentless, almost ritualistic. He would identify a young woman, gain her confidence, isolate her, and commit murder with precision. Each act fed the next, allowing him to refine methods and avoid detection. Yet this same pattern eventually left a trail, and forensic advances, combined with survivor testimonies, would bring him into focus. Each victim had a story, a life interrupted by a man whose ability to blend into ordinary society allowed him to strike repeatedly without immediate consequence. Even when briefly detained or questioned, Alcala's intelligence and charm allowed him to manipulate authorities, present false alibis, and continue his predatory behavior. He moved through the social fabric of Los Angeles, appearing at social events, interacting with strangers, and maintaining a facade of normalcy. Yet underneath, he was calculating, always observing, always planning. This duality, a man outwardly ordinary, inwardly monstrous, was the source of both fascination and horror for law enforcement, families, and the public. The stories of victims like Jill Parenteau, another young woman taken in the same pattern, further illustrated Alcala's manipulative genius. He studied social behavior, learned how to approach people safely, and exploited human empathy with precision. Once trust was established, escape became impossible. Each life taken amplified fear across the city, but also sharpened investigative focus, leading to breakthroughs that would eventually unravel his carefully constructed double life. Alcala's ability to continue predation for years stemmed from a combination of charm, intellect, and careful planning. He understood human psychology, manipulated it to his advantage, and used ordinary environments to mask his crimes. From photography studios to parks, from social gatherings to casual encounters on the street, he created opportunities to isolate victims while leaving little trace of wrongdoing. The investigation would later reveal that his methods, while similar, were adaptable. He could change tactics based on the victim's age, personality, and environment. This adaptability made him more dangerous, more unpredictable, and ultimately more difficult to catch. Each murder was meticulously planned, yet carried out in a way that allowed him to blend back into society seamlessly. Even as authorities began to connect victims, Alcala maintained a public presence, including appearing on The Dating Game, a television show that would later horrify audiences when they learned of his crimes. The juxtaposition of charm and brutality fascinated the public and amplified the media coverage. He became a symbol of how easily evil can hide behind a friendly smile, a lesson that would resonate far beyond the immediate cases. Part 1 ends with Alcala's pattern becoming clearer to investigators. Each victim, Cornelia, Ellen, Charlotte, Jill, Georgia, Robin, Jill Parenteau, was part of a trajectory of escalating violence and manipulation. The pieces of evidence were beginning to converge: photographic evidence, witness statements, and forensic traces slowly revealing the predator, who could appear harmless to casual observers, yet was capable of repeated calculated murders. The stage was set for eventual confrontation, but for now, Alcala continued to move through Los Angeles, hunting, charming, and manipulating the unsuspecting. As the years passed, Rodney Alcala's reign of terror continued, his methods becoming more refined and his confidence growing with each victim he claimed. He learned to read his victims like open books, noticing their routines, vulnerabilities, and the small gestures that betrayed their trust. Next was Cheryl Parks, a 15-year-old girl with a quiet demeanor and an infectious smile. Cheryl loved art and had an affinity for photography, making her particularly susceptible to Alcala's manipulative charm. He approached her under the guise of mentorship, offering to help her develop her artistic skills, to guide her into a brighter future. The subtlety of his approach made her feel special, singled out for attention, and when she walked alongside him that day, oblivious to the danger, she believed she was in the company of a friend. Once isolated, Alcala's persona shifted with chilling efficiency. Cheryl became another in a series of victims, her bright young life cut short, her absence leaving a ripple of fear and confusion in her community. From there, Alcala moved to more audacious tactics, emboldened by his ability to evade detection. His next target, Rhonda Wicht, was 16 and a budding performer, drawn to opportunities for recognition and mentorship. Alcala approached her at a social event, complimenting her talent, expressing interest in her aspirations, all the while calculating the perfect moment to isolate her. Once she trusted him, the sinister pattern continued. The crime was executed with precision, leaving behind few clues, and Alcala once again slipped back into normal life as if nothing had occurred. The sense of impunity was intoxicating, reinforcing his methods and sharpening his predatory instincts. Forensic investigators later pieced together subtle evidence from these cases, footprints, fibers, and eventually photographs that would ultimately become his undoing. Alcala's use of photography was both his signature and his Achilles heel. He photographed his victims under the pretense of art, of capturing innocence, while the camera became a silent accomplice, recording the lives he would take. Investigators recognized that each image, each carefully posed picture, was not merely documentation, but a chilling insight into his obsession with control, domination, and the human psyche. Next was Laura Campbell, 17, whose outgoing personality made her a target for Alcala's manipulations. He met her at a photography studio, where he offered guidance, encouragement, and the semblance of mentorship. Laura, eager for approval, responded warmly, unaware of the predator assessing every gesture, every reaction for signs of compliance. Alcala's conversations were designed to disarm, to lull victims into a false sense of security. Once alone, he executed the same pattern he had perfected: control, intimidation, and murder. The city's growing unease mirrored the private terror of families who could not understand how someone so ordinary in appearance could commit such extraordinary evil. The case of Connie Evans followed, a 15-year-old girl with an innocent curiosity about the world, a curiosity that Alcala expertly manipulated. He approached her with a disarming smile, an interest in her hobbies, and promises of mentorship that played on her desire for adult approval. He tracked her habits, learned her favorite locations, and identified moments when she would be most vulnerable. Once alone with him, Connie's trust became her vulnerability, and Alcala's predatory instincts took over. The meticulousness of his crimes began to suggest someone not just violent, but methodically calculating, blending intelligence with psychological insight. Even as Alcala's crimes escalated, law enforcement struggled to maintain a coherent timeline. Each victim's disappearance seemed isolated, a cruel coincidence, but gradually, a pattern emerged. Investigators began to see the signature: young women and girls with artistic interests, approached by a charming man offering mentorship or collaboration, isolated, and then vanished. The realization brought urgency, but the lack of direct evidence and Alcala's outward normalcy complicated the effort. It was during this period that survivors' testimonies would later shed light on his manipulative techniques. One young woman recalled how Alcala would speak of their shared interests with enthusiasm, creating an illusion of connection, while simultaneously observing her reactions, noting fear or hesitation, and adjusting his approach accordingly. His ability to seamlessly switch between warmth and threat made him unpredictable, a duality that left victims trusting him one moment and powerless the next. The next known victim, Tina Bick, was only 14. Her innocence and eagerness to please made her particularly vulnerable. Alcala approached her in public, praising her artistic abilities and offering encouragement. She felt flattered and protected in his company, yet that sense of safety was a facade. Once alone, Alcala's control was absolute. The crime itself was executed with the same precision that had defined his prior actions, leaving little trace. Tina's disappearance deepened fear across the city, reinforcing the urgency for authorities to identify and stop the predator. Alcala's adaptability extended beyond individual manipulation. He also refined his methods of evasion. He learned to change his appearance slightly, modify his approach depending on location, and maintain multiple aliases when needed. He could attend a photography class one day, a social event the next, and continue predatory behavior undetected. The duality of living an outwardly normal life while committing horrific crimes created a psychological armor that, for years, protected him from accountability. Margaret Mary Della Corte, 16, became another victim caught in Alcala's web. She was curious, outgoing, and trusting, characteristics that Alcala exploited expertly. He approached her with interest in her artistic hobbies, complimented her and built a rapport designed to foster trust. Once isolated, the horrific pattern continued. Each victim provided Alcala with not only a sense of power but also validation of his methodical approach, reinforcing his confidence that he could continue undetected. Meanwhile, detectives began noticing connections between cases, similarities in victim profiles, methods of approach, and locations where bodies were later discovered. The realization of a serial predator's presence caused alarm, but Alcala's skill at blending into ordinary society delayed immediate capture. He maintained employment, cultivated public personas, and even appeared on television, all the while preying on vulnerable young women. His audacity grew in proportion to the difficulty authorities had in proving his guilt. The photography sessions, once innocuous or artistic, were ultimately key evidence. Investigators recognized the systematic nature of Alcala's photos, posed victims, controlled environments, and a consistency in style that revealed not just artistry but obsession. Each image provided insight into his psyche, a man who viewed human beings as objects to be manipulated, captured, and ultimately destroyed. The photographs became both a signature and a trail, eventually linking him definitively to his crimes. Next in his trajectory was Sandra Walters, 17, whose ambition in art and performance brought her into Alcala's orbit. He studied her interactions, complimented her, and established the trust that would make isolation possible. Alcala's manipulation was subtle. He was careful to maintain a friendly facade, appearing supportive and nurturing while preparing to exploit her vulnerability. Once alone, the deadly precision of his crimes came into play, leaving families devastated and law enforcement increasingly aware that they were dealing with a serial predator whose intelligence made him especially dangerous. Each subsequent victim reinforced Alcala's duality, outwardly charming, inwardly lethal. He carefully monitored communities, understood social dynamics, and selected victims whose behavior made them susceptible to influence. From parks to studios, public spaces to private homes, Alcala engineered encounters that would isolate victims while minimizing risk to himself. His crimes were methodical, premeditated, and terrifyingly effective. Investigators piecing together timelines and evidence began to anticipate patterns. They noticed his movement across neighborhoods, his presence at cultural events, and his reliance on photography to lure and document victims. The strategy was clear: create opportunities through charm and feigned mentorship, isolate the victim and execute without leaving immediate evidence. Despite this growing understanding, Alcala remained elusive, blending into daily life with an almost surreal normalcy. Alcala's next victim, Jill Barkham, was targeted with the same manipulative precision, but by now investigators were starting to see the threads connecting each disappearance. Her family's search, combined with subtle forensic evidence and witness reports, contributed to a growing awareness of a serial predator operating in Los Angeles. Alcala, however, continued his charade. He interacted with the public, appeared on television, and maintained a facade of a socially acceptable life, all while perpetuating his pattern of predation. By this stage, the chilling reality was undeniable. Alcala's crimes were systematic, intelligent, and relentless. Each young woman he targeted was drawn into a web of psychological manipulation and control. His charm, combined with keen observation and adaptability, allowed him to continue victimizing young women while eluding law enforcement for years. The duality of his existence, a man capable of appearing affable while committing unspeakable acts, captivated the public imagination and horror alike, creating a narrative that would eventually culminate in one of the most infamous serial killer cases in American history. As law enforcement intensified their investigation, Rodney Alcala's boldness began to falter, though his outward appearance remained unchanged. The city's anxiety had grown with each disappearance, and families demanded answers. The pattern of young women, often involved in creative pursuits and approached under the guise of mentorship, became impossible to ignore. Surveillance increased, witnesses were interviewed, and investigators meticulously reconstructed Alcala's movements, attempting to predict his next steps. One of his final known victims, Robin Samso, 16, was drawn into Alcala's web with the same manipulative tactics. He observed her routines, learned her hobbies, and positioned himself as someone who could guide and support her interests. Robin's family later recounted her excitement about the new mentorship opportunity, unaware that Alcala's attention was anything but innocent. The tragic cycle repeated: trust, isolation, and murder. Each crime seemed more audacious than the last, and Alcala's confidence was mirrored in his chilling ability to maintain a public facade while simultaneously committing unspeakable acts. Detectives eventually traced him through a combination of eyewitness reports, vehicle sightings, and the forensic trail left in the wake of his photography sessions. His photos, once thought innocuous, were now being examined in painstaking detail. They revealed subtle consistencies, poses, backgrounds, and repeated locations that connected him to multiple victims. Investigators realized that each image, while superficially artistic, documented Alcala's obsession and provided clues to his network of victims, some of whom had not yet been discovered. The camera that had been his tool of manipulation became a roadmap to justice. Alcala's final known murder victim, a young woman named Robin, became central to the investigation. She had been promised mentorship and artistic guidance, making her an ideal target. But this time, Alcala's overconfidence worked against him. Witnesses recalled seeing him with her, noting his behavior and vehicle. The law enforcement net began to tighten. His patterns, once seemingly invisible, became traceable through careful analysis of time, location, and victim profiles. It was the convergence of survivor accounts, forensic evidence, and his own photographic documentation that finally allowed authorities to close in. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Alcala's dual life, ordinary man in public, predator in private, was a critical element of his deception. He had cultivated an image as a successful photographer and charismatic mentor, which allowed him access to communities and families, masking his true intentions. This duplicity complicated both the investigation and the public's understanding, creating a sense of disbelief that someone so normal could commit such horrific crimes. Yet the evidence accumulated: fibers, hair, witness statements, and eventually photographs that unmistakably linked him to victims. During surveillance operations, law enforcement observed Alcala's interactions with potential victims, noting the subtle cues he used to gain trust. He employed flattery, feigned shared interests, and exploited the vulnerabilities of teenagers seeking guidance or recognition. Investigators documented how he adapted to each situation, maintaining charm and approachability while positioning victims in controlled environments. Each encounter reflected not just predatory instinct, but meticulous planning. The eventual arrest of Rodney Alcala marked a turning point in a case that had gripped Los Angeles for nearly a decade. Authorities apprehended him based on a combination of witness testimony, forensic evidence, and photographic documentation. His capture was a shock to the public, as Alcala's outward appearance had allowed him to blend seamlessly into society. The revelation of his crimes, detailed through photographs and accounts from survivors, highlighted the chilling reality of his manipulation and the breadth of his predation. During the trial, prosecutors presented a carefully constructed case, demonstrating Alcala's methodical approach to selecting and exploiting victims. Witnesses recounted his deceptive tactics, how he offered mentorship, how he created trust, and how he isolated each victim. The photographs, once a tool of manipulation, were now evidence of his crimes, illustrating not just the moments before the murders, but also the calculated control he exerted over his victims. The courtroom became a stage for the horror and cunning of a man whose intelligence had allowed him to evade justice for years. Alcala's defense attempted to portray him as a misunderstood artist, a man whose photography had been misinterpreted, yet the weight of evidence was overwhelming. Survivors' testimonies combined with the physical evidence painted a portrait of a predator who had meticulously orchestrated his crimes, exploiting both human psychology and social trust. The jury faced the undeniable truth of his calculated evil, and the trial underscored the importance of meticulous investigative work in bringing such individuals to justice. Beyond the courtroom, the psychological profile of Rodney Alcala became a point of analysis for criminal experts. He exhibited traits common to organized serial predators: high intelligence, charm, adaptability, and a profound lack of empathy. His ability to compartmentalize daily life from his criminal acts, combined with his strategic manipulation of victims, made him particularly dangerous. Experts emphasized that understanding his methodology was critical for both prosecution and prevention, highlighting the psychological patterns that enabled him to operate undetected for so long. In the aftermath of Alcala's conviction, attention turned to his victims, whose lives had been tragically cut short. Families and communities grappled with grief and loss, while advocates emphasized the need for awareness of manipulative behaviors and early warning signs. Each victim's story, once obscured by fear and secrecy, became central to the public understanding of his crimes. Their lives were remembered not only for their tragic ends, but for their individuality, creativity, and aspirations which Alcala had sought to exploit. The media coverage of Alcala's case also highlighted the role of photography as both a tool and a weapon. Investigators' ability to analyze images for subtle clues became a critical component of solving the case, and experts in criminal profiling studied how predators could use seemingly innocent methods for nefarious purposes. Public discussions raised awareness about personal safety, consent, and the importance of vigilance, particularly regarding interactions between adults and minors. Even years after his conviction, Alcala's case continued to serve as a cautionary tale for law enforcement and the public. The combination of charm, intelligence, and meticulous planning had allowed him to operate under the radar, but his eventual capture underscored the importance of collaboration between investigators, forensic experts, and community members. The case demonstrated how careful observation, pattern recognition, and attention to detail could ultimately overcome even the most cunning predator. Rodney Alcala's life and crimes left an indelible mark on criminal justice and society. His manipulation of victims, blending of public normalcy with private horror, and use of photography as both lure and signature illustrated the complex dynamics of predatory behavior. The victims' stories became central to understanding the human cost of his actions, emphasizing that beyond the sensationalism of serial killer cases, the lives of those affected are paramount. As the narrative of Alcala's crimes continued to unfold in documentaries, true crime podcasts, and academic studies, the story retained a chilling resonance. His ability to charm and deceive, combined with a lack of remorse, highlighted the terrifying reality that evil can exist in seemingly ordinary forms. Investigators, psychologists, and the public were reminded that vigilance, awareness, and a commitment to justice are essential in preventing similar tragedies. The impact of Alcala's crimes reached beyond the immediate victims and their families. Communities were left grappling with fear, questioning how someone so unremarkable could commit such extraordinary evil. The case also influenced law enforcement techniques, emphasizing the importance of profiling, careful evidence collection, and the analysis of behavioral patterns. Each lesson learned became a tool in the ongoing fight against predatory crime, ensuring that Alcala's victims would not be forgotten and that future cases could be addressed with greater efficacy. Rodney Alcala's capture, trial, and conviction ultimately revealed the duality of his existence, a man capable of appearing affable, intelligent, and artistic, yet capable of horrific violence and manipulation. His methods, from charm to photography, demonstrated the sophistication of his predatory behavior and the profound challenges investigators faced in bringing him to justice. The combined efforts of survivors, law enforcement, and forensic experts created a blueprint for understanding and apprehending organized serial offenders. In reflecting on his crimes, the public grappled with the intersection of trust and deception, innocence and exploitation. Alcala's life serves as a stark reminder that danger can reside behind the most unassuming appearances, and that vigilance, empathy, and community awareness are critical in protecting the vulnerable. The stories of his victims, preserved through testimony and memory, continue to honor their lives, ensuring that the human impact of Alcala's crimes is never overshadowed by the infamy of his actions. Ultimately, the tale of Rodney Alcala is one of manipulation, intelligence, and horror, but it is also a story of perseverance, justice, and the importance of understanding human behavior. Investigators' relentless pursuit of the truth, coupled with the courage of survivors and the resilience of families, demonstrates that even the most cunning predators can be stopped. Alcala's crimes, while devastating, have provided critical lessons for law enforcement, psychology, and society, emphasizing the ongoing need to recognize, understand, and combat the darkest aspects of human behavior.